Will I?
Jamie is walking down the corridor as we speak.
Aye.
Perfect time.
Minute earlier, we could even walk.
Yeah.
As soon as you're ready.
Yeah, done. We're on.
Oh, we're on. Right, in that case, good evening, ladies and gentlemen and councillors. We finally managed to reach a quorum, even if it was rather last minute. We've got quite a busy agenda, so I'm going to do a couple of the formal bits that we have to do initially. And then we'll go on to two separate presentations. One by Mr. Abrahams in relation to the new road garages, which he assures me will be short. And then a presentation by the town in connection with Women's Field. So the first item is to receive apologies for absence. I know we've had apologies from councillors Davis and Fuller. Councillor Jones will wait to see if he can make it later or not. Do we accept those apologies? Yes. Right, well in that case, and without further ado, Mr. Abrahams, would you like to
Sure. Yes. Right now,
it's probably easier if you come.
yeah, I'll stand up here. I don't have anything for the screen. I'll have a big screen. Yeah, so I was a late addition to the agenda, so thank you very much. My name is John Abrahams. I'm the proud owner of some fantastic looking garages on New Road. Some of you may be familiar with these garages here. They've been, well, not used for some time. And I've always driven past them and thought that would make a fantastic plot. Yeah. And thankfully they came up for sale and they acquired them some time ago. So the purpose of this meeting really is just gauge some feedback from yourselves and field any questions to the proposal that we're putting in pre-application for a design, a single dwelling. These chaps that are with me here today, Seabrook Design, have designed a very lovely looking single dwelling, which is going to be a 4-bedroom, 4/5 bedroom house. It's very modern in appearance. We've done this after getting some pre-application advice from a planning consultant. There were no real issues raised. The only two issues that were raised were the flood zone, and we got a separate flood survey done, a copy of which I brought along with me. Doesn't seem to be any issues in that regard. The only other issue was the trees behind on the skate park, which was why I contacted yourself, really just to ask about what the management plan was for those trees and whether any of them were coming down or any TPOs, etc. So yeah, that's why I got invited along here. Just wanted to sort of show what we were doing, and see it's just a nice looking single dwelling. I brought along some drawings. If there's any questions, I'm happy to.
Do you want to give a copy?
Sure. Yeah, sure. Yeah, very good. Oh, yeah. So I don't know if you're aware of the actual garages themselves, but they're very overgrown and well, they're not used for cars anymore. My son thinks they're just a drug den at the minute, so I don't know whether that's still the case. Why he knows that there are drugs being sold in those garages, I have no idea.
So this is a very sort of thin plot.
It is a very thin plot. It's a very thin house. We've tried to obviously be sympathetic to the plot.
It's surprisingly still 11 metres in depth, so
Yeah.
it is suitable for a garden.
Yeah, I mean, obviously one of the major concerns is that it backs onto the skate park. If anyone's walked back behind the garages recently, you'll know it's a very sort of dark, dingy, overgrown place. Obviously, as part of the development, we'd be very sympathetic to what it's backing onto. I know there's obviously been new skate park plans that have been approved recently. I don't know whether they're on hold or not, but obviously we want this to be, clearly it's part of that landscape. So, we'd like to put appropriate lighting and landscaping behind that just to complement it.
The white block there.
Yes.
That's a single garage.
Yes, it is. Yes, it
As
is.
opposed to the current.
Yeah, that's not part of the plot.
Separate again.
That is separately owned. It's actually owned by North
Yeah.
Northants Council.
Looking at it, I'm assuming that that's a garage,
Yes.
and that's a sort of, in effect,
Yeah,
a
it's
sort
like
of
along the
carport
cross.
area.
Yeah.
And so what you've got parking, is that a double garage?
Well, it's a single garage at the moment, but it could be extended, could be a double garage.
I'm just conscious of the NNC parking requirement for a full-scale 5-bed property, which is 3 spaces.
Yeah.
I'm looking at that and thinking,
You'd get more than that. I mean, if you actually drive onto the plot as it is, you can get 2. Because that driveway is front to back. So there's effectively like an undercroft, so you can drive underneath the house. So there's plenty of space there. Now, I should stress that this is not a final design. This is really just something that we're putting in for a pre-app to the county council. But obviously, those are the kind of things that we need to bear in mind for any kind of final design.
anybody else have any questions?
Just one thing I would say is it's hard to see what you look out onto. Now I'm guessing.
So this area here is like north facing. It's actually like it's designed like an upside down house. So most of the living area is up on the top floor.
Okay.
And this terrace actually overlooks the fields to the net. So
here's the existing. This section over here, this grey building represents the outdoor tower and exhaust centre.
Yeah. Okay.
So this is oriented to Page North, so you have the sort of arena over here, and then this is all the large floodplain well within the flood zone, so it won't be developed on. This is why we're trying to have the upside down house and the terrace at the first floor, so elevates you above the pedestrians, above the traffic on the road, and you see over the views to the north.
Okay.
Well, that's the hope anyway. We have gone there with some step ladders to try and get a live view, but obviously they're not quite tall enough. We didn't actually want to stand on the roof of the garages because we didn't want to put a foot through them.
I wouldn't recommend it.
it's currently asbestos, yeah.
Any other questions?
Very basic question. Given the key demand in that area is for 1 stroke 2 bedroom houses, why a 5-bedroom house?
Because I'm not a property developer, and it's for myself. So
Oh, I see. That's what you want.
I don't want to live in it.
That's what I was like.
Even though actually it's only myself and my son live in there, technically. But yeah. Yeah, I mean, I recognise that is, but to be honest, I'm aware that there are obviously other developments going on, I think.
It's a fair answer. If that's where you want to live and that's what you want, then
Yeah,
then
yeah,
that's
that's
coming
fair.
We think the cheap, affordable, sustainable housing may be taken care of by another proposal, possibly.
Petrol station is, Carlton's petrol station, there's 9 new dwellings, which are all 2 bedrooms, I think.
Yeah, I think that's been back to us 4 times so far.
Right.
We're yet to be convinced, shall we say, about some of the things we've seen.
Just one question. Would you be looking out from the back of this onto the play area? 'Cause that could potentially be an issue with parents or.
I mean, no more so than any of the other houses,
Right, okay.
right? I mean, bear in mind so you've got the line of trees.
Yeah.
So all of the top floor windows, So if you look at the plan, this doesn't show very well,
Yeah.
but there are no direct windows looking from the top floor out. There are only high sort of, I don't know what the word is, roof lights, yeah.
But you primarily got a bank of trees.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But you've also got the skate park and then you've got the
Yes.
skate park.
Can I say, from the illustrations, I'll call
Sure.
them, does it fill the whole plot, the house?
No, not at all.
Because it clearly comes right up to the pavement edge.
Well, this part here does, yeah, that would be the garage. But most of it is set some way back and,
So what's that?
that's a brick wall.
Right.
So the actual,
And then
the actual.
how, is there any green space at all?
There's a garden,
Yeah, there's a garden, yeah, I mean, effectively,
You can't draw the garden around it because it fills the plot.
yeah,
from
so
back
if you
to
look
front,
at, right, there we go. So if you look here, you've got, that's the outline of the house, and you've got space behind,
Yeah,
you've got spaces
so
like
that
this.
doesn't belong to the
Yeah,
house.
absolutely.
No, it's the red line is the
It's the
outline.
outline, yeah,
You've got this, you've got about an inch and a half
there.
set back
Okay.
from the pavement, and you've got all of this, which is.
So
garden.
that's what I'm asking.
So if you,
So that's the end of the plot
Yeah.
there, and then.
the actual footprints of the property is less than the garage footprints right now,
Right,
okay? And then you've got green space beyond that, so,
right, that's just.
Obviously, it's
actually
higher.
From the drawings, how far out.
Does anybody else have any other questions at this stage?
I just, I'd like to say from my point, it's very, very nice design.
very much.
Beautiful.
Steve's done it.
Yeah. It's exactly the kind of thing I think Anna could do with, anyway.
Yeah, I mean,
Really,
you
really
know,
nice design.
we're very good, you know, we're big admirers of, the new, you know, the school sports hall and a lot of the other modern buildings in Elvis, we try to be sort of sympathetic to it.
I think it's, yeah, for us, it's been a great project to take on, really being outside of the conservation area, but within the housing plan.
Yeah.
And having a client like John, who himself is a designer, who, because that property had been bought out by a developer, not with the best interest of Outlaw necessarily. It could have just been a generic block of flats, so that's their profits. And we're trying to make something a little bit more sensitive, but also personal to Outlaw.
We're trying to help serve residents with sustainable and modern construction techniques as well, so we're going to try and use a minimised concrete build.
Same thing about materials.
The material usage on the cladding so far is to kind of complement the themes shown at the wall, with the tap and kitchen and the tyre garage opposite. But we understand that obviously the down there's a lot of stone as well, so we have to incorporate some of that.
Yes, we're not obviously that far from the listed building at number Y, which is currently part of the garage complex. And indeed, of course, parts of the Riverside Maltings complex are themselves listed, so you need to be a little sympathetic to it. That's the wider context. But I'm grateful to you for bringing this to us first. I suspect there's probably not a lot more we can say at the moment. Whether we'll have an opportunity during the course of today's meeting to discuss this, I'm not sure, because we've got a fairly full agenda.
Yeah, no, I'm not conscious about that, like I said, I
So
just
what we
wanted to.
might do, depending on where we get to, is to put this, say, on our next agenda for a discussion. And if we do, we'll let you know. So
Yeah,
if you
okay.
attend, you can.
Yeah, sure, well, I'm happy to, field any more questions afterwards, I'll hang around if anyone wants to, if anyone, I can leave details on this if anyone wants to follow up. I'm more than happy.
Thank you very much.
Okay, well, thank you, I can leave these with you.
Thanks very much.
Cool, thank you.
Right, now, Miller's Field, we've got representatives from town, we've got some residents who are interested, and we indeed have our unitary councillor who's also interested, so over to you.
Do you want to do the fence off? Potential site?
Yeah. Do you understand that?
All right. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, councillors. Thank you for your time tonight. My name is Mike Bodkin. I'm Head of Planning with Town. I'm going to explain a little bit more about who we are and why we're here this evening, and introduce some of our local people that we're working with.
Hi, I'm Richard Pender. I'm the Development Manager for Town and the lead on this particular project.
And so we have got a presentation for you. It's been adapted from a pre-app submission to the council, so it doesn't look ideal, but we just quickly produced it for this evening, and we'll share it with you afterwards. And if anyone else wants a copy of it, just shout. So we are Town. We are a profit with purpose developer. That means that we have high environmental sustainability ethics in all of our developments, and we work largely on social co-housing projects, such as Marmalade Lane in Cambridge, which is our first built project. Co-housing being an intentional community of people who are formed wanting to live in their own bespoke community. With co-housing, common house shared facilities such as a common house, and we'll explain a little bit more about how the proposals for Neilsfield will differ. But the group, the Scandinavian concept of the group comes together, and the people live in the community, and they share the management, and they would have shared meals and that kind of thing. But we're not quite there with Neilsfield. Mole are our architects. They're from Cambridge. They've done a number of award-winning developments in and around the region. Thank you, Rich. And they work with us at Cambridge, at Marmalade Lane. So just talking through some of the key benefits that we feel for Neilsfield, and I appreciate that some of you will have heard an earlier version of this presentation. We'll talk about how things have changed since then. So we're now looking at the scale of development for reasons that Richard will talk about a little bit later on. We're talking about around 40 sustainable new homes, custom build, the group working with us and Mole through the process to design their own homes. We've currently got 8 households signed up and working with us. 2/3 of those are local. I don't know how 2/3 of 8 works. 2/3 of them are local to Handle and the area.
And the answer is it's just increased from 7 to 8, and we haven't updated 2/3.
So they're working with us through the co-design process and the architects. Focus very much on local needs housing. A lot of those households are looking to downsize. So not only will we have the benefit of specific homes for those, but we're freeing up other homes in the locality. We'll be looking to permanently retain the allotments as part of the development, and to formalise those arrangements. Looking at a net zero development, and Richard will pick up on some of what we mean by net zero, guaranteeing biodiversity net gain, and we're working with the natural drain of the site to produce sustainable urban drainage. We're looking to preserve the views from Benfield Road, and sociable, people-friendly design. So we are working through the process with the building group, and that is the very ethos of our design process. And we're also looking to provide a new footpath along the side of Benfield Road. Southern end
of Benfield Road, northern end to the site.
Okay, thanks, Rich. So just very quickly talking through the context. I mean, I'm sure many of you will know the site, owned by Anne and Peter Miller for many years, originally bought by their father, I think. 10-minute walk to the town centre, 4 minutes on a bike, very close to the conservation area, and close to the town centre. Thanks, Rich. Just skip through these. So in looking at the design, we're going to be very conscious of the context, the surrounding, the conservation area nearby, and the other character areas of town. And again, looking at the immediate context of the site, the councillor's house. Which one's yours? On the terrace?
Hmm?
Which one?
One of the ones on the terrace.
Right, excellent. Good. Yeah, so just being aware of the immediate context of the site is really important to us, actually. And keep going, the variety. It doesn't mean to say, I think what I would stress is we're not at the design stage yet. We're not talking about aesthetics. We are looking to fix the principle of development on the site and the scale, the number of units, in order to then kick off a more detailed design process at this stage. And then, so looking at the opportunities and constraints in and around the site, quite a change in levels, as you'll know, 6 metres in height, so that's a story or so, a bit more than a story and a half from north to south, being very conscious of views in and around to the east, to the west, looking to use to maximise the potential of solar gain and the natural orientation of the site and the design process. But being aware of the floodplain, the brook to the south, and how many close neighbours we have in and around.
So I think that's over to me. So Mike mentioned we're a profit purpose developer. That's specifically why the Millers reached out to ourselves and Mole, because passionate environmentalists themselves, they wanted to select a team that they knew could actually deliver those outcomes. As part of the agreement, the Millers have set us fairly strict environmental performance criteria that effectively means that we have to build a net zero development. That's net zero in operation though, and as town we would look to not only meet that but exceed that. So we're looking to build net zero in operation, but also considering the embodied carbon of the materials we use. So we'll be looking to build to industry best standard criteria on embodied carbon, looking to design in water efficiency. So to meet industry best standards, we're likely to include rainwater harvesting, as well as sustainable management of surface water through SUDS design, so minimising runoff of the site, as well as looking to increase the biodiversity present on the site, increase the green amenity to Arundel, formalise the creation of new green amenity to the south of the site. We'll see that on the plan at the moment, and also try and integrate food growing into the scheme. So Mike has mentioned that we're employing a group build, a building group process in our approach to the design of the site. So we're currently we've recruited and working with 8 households, a number of which are sat at the back of the room and are already well involved in the process. The idea behind that is it creates a manageable custom build process. So rather than the site free for all, the custom build where individuals are designing separately their own houses, it's a more managed process that gives sort of reassurance to yourselves that at the end of the day, a cohesive, coherent scheme is arrived at, whilst also giving an opportunity for future owners to shape their community and homes, which we hope would give them greater ownership in the final development. So keenness to be involved in its management, its successful management, to start to build community amongst themselves, and they've already organised a WhatsApp group, so they're already at this very, very early stage talking amongst themselves and forming a community. We hope that will spill into increased neighbourliness in the final development, and it also helps us to work with them to create community sort of led sustainability initiatives. Sometimes it's difficult to do everything on a personal level. So as Mike mentioned, many of the members are local, within 5 miles of Arundel at present. A high proportion are downsizing and wanting to find smaller, more sustainable homes. We've held 2 workshops with them on the current scheme. There'll be another one before we submit an outline submission. They're all holding one-to-one workshops with the architect to shape their homes. And when we move into reserve matters, there'll be a number of further workshops to enable them to influence the scheme. Sort of the key design responses that we've discussed with them that have fed into our scheme to date, creating an effective new frontage to Bennerfield Road that complements the listed dwellings opposite, improving the highway's accessibility to the northern edge. We want to integrate social spaces into the final development. The nature area to the south we've identified as the opportunity to formalise green amenity for the town. Conscious of the need to preserve the views through the site and also formally protect the allotments to the east. So this is our emerging design, and it should be said it's emerging. It's where we've got to thus far. There's still opportunities with the group itself and with residents and yourselves to influence the scheme. We've created that frontage to Bennerfield Road. Should say that the housing mix now concentrates on what we call a bungalow plus typology. So that entails 2 bedrooms to the ground floor and an ancillary bedroom bathroom to the first floor. So people can effectively live on a single floor from the outset should they wish, and the bedroom can serve, the upstairs bedroom can serve as a space for carer or guests, but it's trying to meet that local need for housing for slightly older people. We think this scheme creates a very nice shared central garden, whilst allowing having all private gardens back onto it. And that balance between private and communal is easily sort of alterable. I think it thus far is achieving the key features that we outlined previously. Touch on again?
Just worth saying, under this design, the car parking is shifted to the outside of the development to give the inner space, the shared public space, and focus on the main bulk of the development area for people rather than metal things on wheels.
So just to remind yourselves how this scheme sits in comparison to the scheme that we presented previously to the Town Council. So we've reduced from 25 units down to 14 units. 14 units being the lowest number envisaged in the unadopted neighbourhood plan, but believe Minnesfield was identified for at least 14 units. So as you can sort of hopefully see, and you'll see clearer when we share the presentation afterwards, that's resulted in reduced sort of density scale and massing of the development generally. We've increased the amount of both public and private amenity, increased parking provision and accessibility. And yes, there's been that sort of slight shift in the balance of the housing typology to focus more in response to local need and the need of our early members to sort of bungalow plus downsizers and more elderly people. And just to finish, taking through the sort of contextual analysis that Mike touched on at the beginning and providing reassurance. So some images here contrasting the scheme with development further to the west, and hopefully demonstrating that it sits very compatibly with the existing development to the west. And as we move through the journey to and from the conservation area, with views maintained through the site, and the sort of the appropriate creation of that frontage to Bennerfield Road, which is slightly stepped back with the hedgerow and mature trees preserved. Hopefully you agree it's a sort of appropriate and sympathetic response to the conservation area setting. And I think, yeah, just finally to give you an idea of timelines, just sharing with you our timeline. So we're hoping to submit an outline application to North Northamptonshire at the end of September, and hopefully moving into the more detailed design phase and addressing all the reserved matters in February next year, with a time frame to hopefully move into construction in spring of 2025, with our residents beginning to move in as of spring 26. I think that's us.
Happy to take any questions.
Right, I'm conscious of time.
Yeah.
I'm conscious of the fact that we've got some residents, I think Mr. and Mrs. Raven, I don't know whether they want to ask any questions. I'm conscious of the fact that unitary councillor here as well, who's come specifically to hear this. So first of all, I'll give an opportunity for anybody amongst our guests who would like to put any questions. I think one way or another, we have to move on to the proper agenda by 8:15 at the latest. So we haven't got a massive amount of time, but if anybody does want to ask any questions at this stage, please feel free.
If I may, on the houses that you show in fronting Benfield Road, they look quite large in comparison. They're obviously not bungalow plus.
Yeah.
What are they?
They are 4-bed semi-detached homes, 2-storey, at approximately at this stage 125 square metres.
Right.
So they're envisaged as family homes.
I see. And you're saying they are set back though from the road, not fronting the road as the previous. I think the terraces were going to be pretty much.
Yeah, I think the design has evolved to give them a setback from Benfield Road there.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you can see left to
Yeah, I
right.
see. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's still some.
Yeah.
Okay. Are you still building to passive house? Is that because that was the original idea?
Yeah, sorry, that was on it's unusual for me as a passive house enthusiast to overlook that, but yeah, very much the ambition.
All right. And then one thing I wanted to ask, I mean, obviously we've got to wait to see the
Detail, yeah.
On the building group,
Yeah.
is there a financial commitment there, or is it just a volunteer sort of let's get involved type thing?
There is a financial commitment, but really it's just a signal of intent. It's refundable at the early stages, but it's a commitment fee.
As you go through the process, there would be contributions along the way.
Yeah, okay, right, thank you, yeah. Okay, that's all I need to know.
Any more questions?
Councillor.
Yeah, thank you. So this is the first time I've seen this, so it's very interesting, and thank you for the presentation. And on North Northampton Council, I'm the executive member for Adults Health and Wellbeing. So houses that are designed for people who are ready to look at downsizing are very much needed in the area, so that's really good to see. The co-design principles are really interesting, and the sort of the health and wellbeing aspect of all of this, bringing the communal areas in, the allotment area, and so on. I think, it's a really nice concept. So, I just like to say that it's really nice. I mean, from my perspective, what matters to me is what the people of Amble think, as you can imagine. So I really care about what people locally think, and I know that what really matters generally to them is that what is ultimately built is sympathetic to the area in which it sits, and that's what I care about more than anything else. Obviously, issues like flooding and so on we've talked about, and I know that we have residents here who have been affected by flooding, and would be concerned about making sure that's mitigated. But so long as all those things are in place, as far as I'm concerned, I just don't want to see things that really don't fit in the local vernacular. And that's really going to come later.
Yeah.
So there's not really much I can ask you about that, really. So I think the main thing is just as those steps come forward, obviously I'll keep a really close eye to see what is actually being proposed, and I always listen to my residents to hear what they have to say and listen to their concerns. So it's really just to say that's the way I approach planning matters.
Yeah.
Just for your information, really. So I've not really got any big questions.
Yeah.
Just to give you an idea of how I sort of look at these things as the local unitary council.
Yeah. And I suppose that the sort of, that does come later in the detailed design, but, to reassure you, if you want to go away and look at the calibre of Mole's work, they are first class architects, and, we're working with a really sort of A-grade team, so hopefully, when we get into that stage, you'll be pleased with what we produce.
And if you could share that with me as well.
Yes, yeah.
That'd be really helpful.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Sorry, I've just come back very quickly, I'm sorry to. You said you were going to share the presentation. How are you going to share it? You mean with the councillors, presumably?
Yeah.
Is it possible to share it
Yeah.
with us?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I've got your email.
You have?
I've got your email, so
Yes,
yeah.
okay, that would be great,
I'll
thanks.
fine. Yeah.
Sorry, with the communal spaces, are they for the residents or the general public, or is it a mix?
Well,
Or are you not sure?
it's a really good question, and it's not for us to dictate. It's much more about the group to understand. But there'd be a balance between kind of the private space of individual houses and the more communal space. But the idea, I think, is that just now people walk their dogs on the site, on the field, and they have access down to the you can't really get to the stream at the moment, but we're going to open up that. So yes, we would expect public use of the wider site in future.
I know councillors want to.
There's a small thing.
Councillor Chester.
Oh, sorry, who's
I
first?
think Mark has.
Ladies first,
I'm just going to ask you, you use the phrase increase the biodiversity, and I'm
Yes.
struggling with the idea of
Yeah,
how that can
Right.
increase when
yeah, no,
when you're building on the field.
you're absolutely
It is at the
right, which is why, and forgive me, I slipped into the jargon, but I didn't say on site. So we may look to, and some of it will come into the detailed design. We've had an ecologist walk over, but we need to do some more work. But ultimately, this may be one where we can't generate 10% biodiversity net gain on site, so we might need to look at local projects.
That was just a kind of advertising sort of.
Well, not really. I mean, we need to look at the brook in particular and how we can improve that. So there is a lot that can be done.
You think there are things you can do?
Definitely, there are things that we can do. And obviously, the more access, the more you open up access to something, the more difficult it is to increase biodiversity because humans and nature don't particularly mix well.
Certainly we'd be looking to maximise on-site prior to any off-site solution.
Jamie wanted to.
The other councillors first, and then I'll try and get back to.
So to me, sustainable means future generations. Doesn't necessarily mean now.
Yeah.
So if you're building something that's so not necessarily specific to that customer, if you like, but is a little bit bespoke, let's say eventually these houses are going to be sold. When somebody buys that house, is there a buy-in process? Do they have to buy into the rest of the community, or is it?
Not as envisaged under a building group process. It still ultimately equates to a standard scenario of owning a private home. It's just we're hoping that through the process we create a community in and of itself and create a place that lends itself to a community feel. But the home itself is still the private property of an owner. So there's no sort of restriction around having to buy into.
Okay, so following from that, if you was it Marmalade Lane?
Yeah.
So how long ago was that completed?
Marmalade Lane was completed in 2019.
Okay, so I assume potentially by now someone on their house,
Yes.
sold their house.
Yes.
So,
Yeah. Yes.
so what's the, have they found that easy to sell?
Yeah.
because
We've
of-
got an 11-year waiting list.
Wow, okay, that's, okay.
That answers your question.
Answers-
On the rate of
answers-
turnover.
Marmalade Lane is slightly
Yeah.
different from what we're proposing in that it is a full co-housing development where there is a co-housing group. But the popularity of the principles of the development, I think, are overwhelmingly demonstrated by the fact that the waiting list for properties is
Okay,
huge.
nice.
These communal areas going to be sort of in the hands of a management company that is resident owned, in effect?
Again, I can give you the answer to Marmalade Lane, which is the community manages the estate themselves. Here, we're very much hoping that the building group will decide that that's what they want to do, but we're at the outset of that process. So what I can say is that it won't be a PLC who is responsible for managing the estate, and you never see them other than putting bills through the ground rent. It will be very different to that approach.
Got room for at least one more.
Mark,
See the hand go at least twice.
Yeah, so I live in Warren Bridge on the bottom there, where you're planning to build the footpath. And I'm just interested in what's driving that, because that will have a big impact on all the residents that live along there in Warren Bridge, because that footpath will, at places, be within about 25 to 30 feet of people's house, where there are lounges, bedrooms, things like that. And particularly because of the slope of the site, you mentioned the steep slope, that means that people will be looking straight into those properties, in some cases a little bit higher up, you'll be looking straight into the bedrooms. So why is it so important to have that footpath? Well, it's not leading anywhere. Well, why could it not be just left as a wildlife area, as it is at the moment?
I think the short answer is we're looking, we don't have fixed design ideas. That has been, and I know we discussed this point a couple of years ago, probably that has been an idea to open up access, to improve the management of the brook, but it's not a fixed proposal at this time, and we will be doing further engagement before we go to planning application, and we will take feedback from local residents before we submit the application.
That finishes us off very neatly just before 8:15. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
And I'm sure that you keep us fully abreast of
Yeah.
further
Yeah.
developments.
Thank you. And we'll provide a presentation.
Johnny, could you just pass that?
Yes.
Plug yourself back in. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Close the meeting very temporarily.
Yes.
A number of people are leaving the meeting.
I'll email that across.
Yeah.
Yeah. We have that in the stuff in emailing, but I'm sure we have your
If you do have any questions,
right.
thanks.
We'll get it. It's not mine, but.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. See you again. Speak to you again.
Sorry.
Well, can I ask everybody to leave this room so we can carry on?
Sorry.
Right, I can resume the agenda. It's not often we get to quarter past 8 and we get declarations of interest. It has been one of those evenings. So, declarations of interest. First of all, anybody with any disclosable pecuniary interests? Any other interests? No. Minutes of the previous meeting, that was the meeting held on the 4th of July. Present Councillor Arnold, myself, Councillor Chesser, Councillor Davis, Councillor Jones and Councillor Shearer. The minutes of that meeting have been circulated. If they're approved, then we'll sign them. If anybody has any queries or amendments,
You're going to propose that they should.
proposed by Councillor Chesser, seconded by Councillor Shearer. All those in favour? Unanimous. Bear with me. It's certainly gone eerily quiet. Right.
We've lost the clerk from
We've temporarily lost the clerk. So just to say, we'll follow the order of things in the agenda. I did wonder whether we might end up pushing Stoke Hills Dairy Farm development first, if there had been members of the public or other councillors present. But we might as well stick to the order in which these things appear on the agenda, which hopefully also ties with my notes that I circulated in advance. And the first of those applications is a twin application, if we can put it that way. One, a listed building consent seeking proposed change of roof finish to what's described as the rear projection of an existing dwelling, changing roof from Collyweston slate to natural blue slate. And the other part of the application, if you like, is a variation of an existing condition which requires the roof to a permitted extension to be changed from Collyweston slate, which it was to be, to natural blue slate. Apart from being a listed building, the building in question is within the conservation area. The council does generally have a policy about these things, which is to retain Collyweston roofs. I won't say it all at any cost, but it will be probably few and far between where we would be content with the change. In this instance, the rationale, if I can put it that way, so far as the application is concerned, is that natural blue slate will be a lighter material than Collyweston slate, and therefore, if you like, easier to apply to the rear projection. Since the rear projection was, however, built with Collyweston slate roof in mind, we would like to think that it's still capable of taking a Collyweston slate roof.
I think they've been cheaper.
Well, Councillor, you may well say that, and undoubtedly a natural blue slate roof would be cheaper, probably a pretty
a lot
cheaper
if they do the whole
than a
thing.
Collyweston
Because they
slate
can
roof.
sell the existing Collyweston slates.
Well, there's also that.
Yes.
Collyweston slate is not infinitely available, shall we say, so it has a premium.
It does have a sort of.
Indeed, councillors will recall that even last month, when we considered the application in respect of the Dovecote Dairy Farm, which is roofed in Collyweston slate and is grade 2 listed, the applicant there proposed to reuse what could be reused, but otherwise to re-roof in Collyweston slate. Given those factors, I guess the question is, do we want to object to what is proposed? I think probably the way I've outlined it suggests that I myself have considerable reservations about this application, not least because if we allow this and we get more applications from properties in North Street, quite apart from anywhere else in the town, it gets that much more difficult to resist them. Councillor Chesser ready to hand marginally before Councillor Shearer. I'll let Councillor Chesser.
Well, you can feel from my body language that I feel that we should be consistent in our attitude to these planning applications. And there doesn't seem to me to be any very strong or even weak reason why they should be changed from Holly Weston.
I'd just really repeat what's already been said in that sense. I worry that if we don't object, we would be seen to potentially create a precedent.
Absolutely.
And given that Collie Weston roofing is such a feature of the town and the conservation area, which is its part, I just think it's a change that should be resisted.
That's wrong.
In the small amount of time that I've been on the council, I would say any time this comes up, you two specifically always say the same thing, which is we have never, allowed this. We've always said the same thing. I don't see why we should change that now. So.
It appears that we are unanimous in our view that there is no compelling reason to permit the variation condition or to grant the listed building consent. Collie Weston roofs are, as has been said, very much a feature of the town. That being so, it is our policy that they be retained, and we'd like to stick to that policy.
Do you want to word that one for me, David, or?
I think we can say that. Yeah, I'll draft something. That perhaps was relatively straightforward. The next application, which is in respect of 29 Enfields Road, is for a proposed single-storey rear and side extension to an existing dwelling with a bay window to the front elevation. This is undoubtedly one where I think it would help to get some plans up. So forgive me, I'm going to kind of wander over here. I think probably the thing to do is, first of all, to look at the existing site plan and then the proposed site plans. So as you can see, it's a slightly unusual shaped plot, with the existing structure occupying a sort of substantial chunk of it, in as much as it stretches more or less across the width of the property. If we now switch to a proposed one, hopefully that. Can we try the other one? It's slightly confusing. Right, so what we now see in effect is development very much around the back there. So it's not as if there isn't the space for it. What you will also notice in the way that this is done is that this part of the rear extension, which is single storey, has 4 roof lights in it, and this part is a kind of extended pergola with a glazed roof, if you like, over it. If we can now take a look at the existing elevations. So here we have the front elevation, described as the north elevation, and here we get the west elevation, where you can see, if you like, where the property ends there. Draw your attention to that area there. If we now look at the proposed elevation, so we now have a bay window here, and perhaps more significantly, we can now begin to see this extension area here, part of which has this glazed roof and is the kind of pergola. Then this area of glazed roofing, which has a similar pitch and is tiled similarly, but has the roof lights in it here. We can also see the bay window sticking out here. And what they're doing in this area is to construct, if you like, an ingle nook on either side of the existing fireplace, which you can see if you take a look at the proposed floor
Floor
plan.
plan.
So here we have the two ingle nook areas on either side of the existing fireplace, which is maintained. There is the bay window. The if you like, it simply replaces the existing. It's not widening it or indeed narrowing it. Over this side, we have the kind of what I might call the pergola effort here. And then over here, we have the extension. And in essence, there's an almost complete reworking of the ground floor. We now have a kitchen and utility here, and the study here, but we have this area here, which links into a dining area and a family area. This is effectively called a snug. So it makes a large house larger still. Clearly has some nice features. It doesn't alter the number of bedrooms. It doesn't trigger any need for any extra car parking. The car parking itself doesn't seem to be affected in any way by what's proposed. And when I looked at the portal, the only comment, if you like, was from Transport, who said that they basically didn't have any observations to make on the application. Thoughts?
I don't have a problem with it.
It's got some interesting features to it. I commend the fact they've got solar panels.
Yes, I didn't mention that. In fact, it's a word in my report. On the tiled roof of the extension area over the snug, etc., we have a bank, two banks of solar panels. It's an impressive property that I suspect becomes even more impressive with the works to it. There were no public comments on the portal when I looked, so no neighbours
Still not.
seem to be exercised by it. Like Councillor Chesser, I looked at it and couldn't see any obvious reason to be worried about it. So I think that's a no objection. Ms. Councillor Arnold.
No.
I see. Right, despite the wording of the next item, this is not the Dovecote that Diary Farm, as it says. It's an interesting typo. But it's Dairy Farm, and it's actually the bits that aren't the Dovecote, because we looked at the Dovecote last month. This is quite an application. Dairy Farm was one of the sites identified for residential development in the rural Northumberland Fraxton plan of quite some time ago. That plan is in the process of being worked up into the local plan part 2, which of itself will in due course be superseded by yet a new plan, which they have commenced work on that we got very far with. But the fact of the matter is that RNOTP is still the official development plan, and the site having been earmarked for residential development, it seems likely that development will be permitted, provided, if you like, that the development is appropriate. In RNOTP, the site as a whole was considered suitable for up to 20 dwellings. This actually proposes 9 dwellings, none of which are of any great size. They're largely 3-bedroom, but only, if I remember right, it's a couple of 2-bedroom properties. It ends up with something like 18 bedrooms. What is is interesting about the application, amongst other things, is this. Part of the development involves removing some of the existing structures on site, none of which seem particularly exciting structures, if I can put it that way, and creating a new residential block, which, as far as I could work it out, appeared to have one bungalow and then 3 properties that were 2-storey. But in addition to that, 4 of the existing barns on the site would be converted into residential use, and 1 into a kind of amenity type building for storage of bins, storage of bicycles, etc., etc. There is an interesting dichotomy between the view of the developer on the one hand and NNC Archaeology on the other, as to whether or not at least some of this development should be regarded as being listed, even though it is not separately listed, by virtue of being within the ambit, if I can put it this way, of the listed properties at 5 and 6 Stoke Law Road. Of course, there are a number of other properties in and around Stoke Hill which are also listed, such as New House, such as number 1 Stoke Hill. The approach of NNC Archaeology was that because 5 and 6 were part of the whole dairy farm complex, with the property being managed out of 1, with the other being rented out, albeit that New House was also at that stage part of the thing, that it would be right to regard part of this site as effectively amounting to listed building. Whereas the developer says the whole thing is unclear and seeks within its paperwork to try and persuade us, and by us I mean not OTC specifically, but the world at large, that it shouldn't be looked at in that way. Hence, there is no separate listed building application dealing with that aspect of matters. There are a mass of documents to look at. There is a heritage impact statement, there's a design and access statement, and between the 2 of them there's about 40 pages. Some of which is quite helpful, some of which has some quite helpful diagrams and pictures. There are all sorts of separate documents for the separate barns and all the floor plans, for example, of what we call the new build areas, and so on and so forth. Perhaps again, to contextualise it, the northern part of the development clearly sits within the conservation area, so that even if it's not to be regarded as listed, it is nevertheless within a conservation area with all of that perhaps should it entail. So it's also worth noting that on the portal as of the weekend, there were a whole string of consultee comments, most of which were critical. And the Environment Agency considered that as it stood, the application didn't comply with the Joint Core Strategy Policy 5. They were concerned about the drainage situation, the fact that it doesn't seem to be being addressed in the way that we wanted it. In addition, and perhaps of considerable interest, is they say that I've just realised that something very strange happened to my note, but NNC Housing states that if the planned ground floor area is over 1,000 square metres, and for some reason that suddenly shot up in the Environment Agency bit, there's an affordable housing requirement of 40%. And the ground floor area of this proposed development is 1,128.5 square metres. So they say therefore there should be an affordable housing requirement, but there is no provision within this plan for any affordable housing. Now, I must admit that I had previously thought that the affordable housing thing triggered with developments of 10 properties or more, and hadn't picked up on this square footage point. But it's certainly been raised by housing, and knowing what this council feels about the need for affordable housing in Oundle, I suspect that we will be siding with the NNC Housing and saying that if it stays as it is, then some provision has to be made on site for affordable. I can envisage that that might cause issues for the proposed developer on the basis that there are, quote unquote, only 9 dwellings on the site. You have to put in 40% affordable. You're looking at something between 3 and 4 of those dwellings actually having to be affordable. And I suspect they'll say that that's unsustainable, but that's what developers are going to do. Transport and highways aren't happy because of the length of the, as it were, access to the development. They're saying you've got to put in provision for an adopted highway in order to get there. And rather bizarrely, they're saying that the turning head that's being put on the plans is too big. So I can imagine them saying it's too small, but I was slightly taken aback when they said it's too big. The basic one is one that is adequate for the turning circle of a standard refuse vehicle, which is fine, but as I say, I was slightly taken aback by that. Waste management were also unhappy for, in a sense, a similar reason. The length of journey proposed to get bins from the development to the highway, taking into account that on this basis the highway is Stokewell Road itself rather than an adopted road coming into the development, that would be excessive. Now, I suppose you kill 2 birds with 1 stone if you put in an adopted highway, because then there isn't going to be an issue for waste management, provided there's adequate access for a refuse vehicle to enter and leave the development in full gear. Environmental protection wanted a site investigation for possible contamination and set up what I might call a proposal for a condition of the usual construction management plan, restricting development hours to the usual hours, Monday to Friday and Saturdays. NNC Archaeology were critical because it appears that no archaeological work has been done under the surface. People have simply done a desktop surface exercise, and NNC Archaeology is saying, given where it is, that's not good enough. There should be some proper archaeological investigation before development starts, so that if development is given permission, there should be conditions attached along those lines. I can think of at least one councillor who would be very sympathetic to that approach, for all of us. And then see nature development, wanted an update to the bat survey, though councillors will recall the plan for there to be a bat roost in Fulham Dovecote. They also wanted, and this links to what we were talking about with Tam earlier, a biodiversity net gain assessment to show how biodiversity net gain can be achieved within a development, whether on site or by presumably off-site offsetting, if I can call it that. So there's quite a lot in there without actually even considering the specifics of the actual buildings planned. And this is an application for full permission. So it's a bit like the Stoke Door Road scenario. We haven't had an application for outline followed by applications for full permission, as we had with Cotterstock Road and St Christopher's Drive. This has gone straight into an application for full. My guess is that if and when the developer can produce a scheme that meets some of the objections I've outlined from others, and we may have our own over and above those, that it will get permission because of its status effectively as an allocated site. Admittedly, it's an allocated site which EMC and subsequently NNC had written off as being unachievable because no application had come in and they didn't think whatever it was going to. Well, it's happened, and it's happened, I suspect, because it isn't flagged up as part of the local plan part 2. So if that was adopted in place of our NO2P, suddenly this is no longer an allocated site. So I'm not surprised that they've rushed in and got their application in. In that context, I'll mention very briefly that, of course, there are still around 50 dwellings planned for land between Ashton Road and Herne Road that's never come forward. I think because of complexities around multiple land ownership amongst other things which have prevented it. But for precisely the same reason, I would say watch this space, because it wouldn't yet surprise me if that comes forward. That again, NMC in Local Plan Part 2 effectively written off as being unachievable, and therefore hadn't factored that into the latest plan. But of course, if they come along, it will mean that all the development identified in our NO2P will have happened, plus all the stuff that's happened over and above that, some of which is, of course, allocated within the local plan part 2. The history of the site is quite interesting, but I suspect that I've set it out within the report, and I won't want to say more about it unless anybody wants me to. There's a lot about it within the Heritage Impact Statement, for example, some interesting pictures and so on. So, I guess the question is, despite our reservations about residential development in the town without appropriate infrastructure development, and we should no doubt still mention that, we've probably got to bite the bullet and say this one is going to happen once they get it right. The question is, have they got it right yet?
I'm just wondering if the proposal for 9 dwellings is a way of getting away with not having to put social housing in.
Well, as I said earlier, it struck me. I had always thought that the trigger was 10 dwellings.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
And that's why I looked at this instantly and thought, I can see why this is 9 dwellings. They don't want to have an affordable bit in there and try to have an argument about why they shouldn't have any or should have less than 40%. And then I read the bit from housing that says, oh no, rural area, if your proposed development has over 1,000 square feet of floor area, then it triggers the affordable housing provisions, which currently are a block 40%. So if that was the developer's thinking, it appears that they've slipped into the same error that arguably I had fallen into in thinking that it would be exempt. I almost take it as read that our observations are going to include an observation about affordable housing provision not being avoided, as long as the development on the face of it triggers the need, then it's got to provide for it, and in its present form it doesn't, which would be a ground to object quite apart from anything else. Other observations on the board? Councillor Schuler.
Yeah, like you, I kind of fear that to a certain extent it might go ahead, despite the fact it seems to be riddled with problems. It's difficult to know where to start. But one thing that I do think we've got something to point to is what seems to be the developer's ambiguity around the extent to which it's covered by listings permission. And I don't think it's ambiguous at all. I think it's actually relatively straightforward. Listings permission clearly covers the property associated with it. It doesn't matter whether there's a building on it or not. Effectively, this is a listed property. Full stop. I don't think there is any ambiguity.
I tend to agree, I have to say.
I agree too.
You agree too, so perhaps I would not start with, there should have been an application of the listed building consent, not just for the Dovecot, but the size of the thing.
Yeah.
But as it were, to head off the possibility that all they do is then resubmit a listed building consent application in precisely the same terms as this, perhaps with a slightly reworded heritage impact assessment to reflect. There's the affordable housing point. We may very well want to take on board certain of the other objections, e.g. archaeology, e.g. waste and highways and what have you.
And I think we should also insist on that archaeological survey.
Yes, I think that that's
I sort of welcome the fact that there are less houses, because, you know, we've got so many,
Yeah.
this, you know, so near to fulfilling our quota.
filled and beyond.
Filled with, yeah.
And let's face it, 20 dwellings on that site. Whilst within the allocation does strike me as being ambitious, given its constraints, one of which is its potential proximity to the flood area, which arguably limits where you can put development in order to keep it away from there. And also 20 dwellings discharging out onto Stoke Road at that particular point, a little alarming.
I just don't see how that's realistic.
Whereas 9 at least is rather more realistic.
I can see those houses at the bottom being a foot underwater within 10 years.
Yeah. Well, of course, the risk is that flood events will only tend to get worse. It is not very far from the river.
No, I know.
There are issues we know around the Lifton Brook, and flooding in the Warren Bridge area is not exactly unknown. So we may want a degree of convincing that what is proposed is not likely to flood within at least a 75-year average period, if not significantly better than that. Add flooding to the list.
I think flooding is a vital part of it.
Yes.
Because it does flood. And more houses are going to be built on Miller's Field.
Well, it's also
Floods in
true
the same
that
direction.
one wonders whether building on Miller's Field will displace water down what we recognise as
I
the
assume it
slope.
does.
Because from Miller's Field down towards Dairy Farm is effectively a distinct drop.
Absolutely.
Since water tends to go downhill rather than up, if it's going to be displaced, it's going to go down the hill, which might create other issues, unless you can ensure that the Miller's Field proposed development drains into a brook that is done in such a way that that brook is not going to overflow and cause a knock-on effect.
And the devil will be in the detail once we see the Miller's plans. But yeah, at the moment, you know, that water's got to run somewhere.
Yes.
My question would be, I think, more to you, but do you think realistically, in your experience, as it stands, it will, you know, go through? Have you seen something like this go through?
Well, my thinking actually, and one reason why I haven't gone into massive detail about the specifics of the plans for the new build and the plans for Barnes A, B, C and D, is that I don't think that this one is going to go through first time of asking. I am pretty convinced that we're about to hit another saga like Stoke Newell Road, where we're going to see this application coming back and back as they try to tick off queries and objections that are raised to it in an attempt to get it through, rather like happened with the development at the garage, where I think after about 4 attempts, we ourselves decided on balance not to continue our objections to it. But it sounds like there are still issues going on because it hasn't come through NNC as yet. So whether we're going to see iteration 5 of that plan, I don't know. So we've got concerns around should there be a listed building application in the first place. We believe there should be. We're very sensitive to the proximity of listed buildings, the location of the listed dovecot within the site, the fact that part of the site is in the conservation area, etc. That also triggers our concern, shared with NNC Archaeology, that there needs to be a proper archaeological survey pre-development.
I'm not wanting to interrupt, but I would like a question. So you and Max between you might be able to answer it.
Ask away,
Because
we'll see if we can.
No, because we know it's a historic site, and you've said that there is stuff on the internet about it.
Yes.
What would happen if it was found to be particularly of interest?
What happens is that the development has to be put on hold until the archaeologists finish their job.
Right? So that would take time.
Go and talk to Leicester Cathedral, they've had exactly the same problem over the last 2 years.
Yeah.
But could it mean that it would change the...
Unlikely to get to the stage, I suspect, where it becomes a kind of ancient monument where you simply couldn't.
No,
It-
that's...
it
that's
doesn't-
what I was
What I'd like to do
wondering
is a
what they-
proper,
It shelves it rather than stops it,
Right.
if you see what I mean. Because if they find something of any significance, it has to be properly then excavated,
Yeah.
documented, everything else. And unless it's of literally national importance, as our chair says, they then just cover
They
it
would
over.
cover it up and... Okay.
however, of course, the cost of doing that is not inconsiderable. The cost of today is not inconsiderable.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be the first development that has been stymied simply because people aren't prepared to do that.
Yeah.
And that's why the
Yeah,
developers
I
don't
think
want
that's
it,
one
because
asking the question.
it first of all, it's a cost, but it's also a cost where, you know, the costs can rise depending on if anything is
It's
found.
found, yeah.
Um,
I mean, could it change its status into being...
But it
I doubt
it doesn't stop development per se, it just simply shelves it for a while.
I mean, unless you found it sort of Stonehenge too,
Yeah.
or something,
Yeah.
which, you know, can't say it's impossible, but I would say it seems pretty
The fine would
unlikely.
have to be absolutely,
Yeah, it would have to be of at least the level of
Yeah.
Have to be-
international importance
yeah.
for it to get to the
Have to
stage
be a king that
where they
is-
weren't allowed to develop it, and they would just have to do something to preserve that.
Otherwise, it would just be documented and basically filled in.
But I'm just wondering, you see, if they've gone for full, whether they want to kind of rush it through before we've had chance.
I think the reason that they've done it this way is, as I said earlier, because it's not allocated in the local plan part 2, if that gets adopted. And ROTP is kicked out of the window, this is no longer an
Yeah.
allocated site, and they may find it more difficult to get permission.
Afterwards, yeah.
So, you know, had I been advising them, I would have said, for heaven's sake, get an application in if you're going to,
Yeah,
sooner rather than later, and thus it comes. But we have a number of concerns about it.
Absolutely.
Quite apart from matters of detail around the specifics of what is planned, where again, where I would be inclined to say is that of course, in terms of renovating the barns and conversion, you need to be very careful about trying to minimise the disruption to materials and maintain materials wherever possible. And of course, it needs to be done in very close collaboration with our conservation officer. And so all of those things kind of link together, the listed building situation, the conservation area, the archaeological, so there's a whole raft of things there. But then there's a site-specific worry that we want NNC to make as sure as can be that this is not going to find itself subject to flooding in part of what is currently proposed, and that in doing that, they ought to have regard to the probability of a residential development on this field, which is likely to come. As to which will come first, well, clearly there's an application for outline, which we can probably expect to be looking at in our October meeting, from the sound of it. If they manage to stick to their current schedule, okay, it's outline, but if they get outline, then it's a matter of the detail, the principle will have been established. But I don't want to get stuck too much talking about Mansfield, albeit that we can probably spend quite a time talking about what we see this evening. So, any other observations on what we've seen? And it may be the councillors have studied some of the plans specifically around bonds A, B, C and D and or about the new builds. But as I say, I didn't in the end cover it, partially because of the time factor of trying to do it, partially because, as I say, I'm convinced we're going to get this back.
Are you going to be helping Lisa write
Well, I would be somewhat staggered if I didn't request from assistance on something here, because our discussion has been relatively wide-ranging, as I knew it would be. Is there anything else anybody wants to add? But it's on the basis that we do object, and then it's just a question of setting out the various reasons why.
My objection would be the affordable housing, always will be, based on things like this.
That was actually, not that I put them down in any specific order, but insofar as there is an order, it was actually the first thing I wrote down, because it was a very obvious one. Right, so we object. The rest of this should be somewhat easier, because there are two applications to do with trees, and all the matters are there for information only. I must admit, due to a time factor, I did not look specifically at the plans around the Cotterstock Road and Christopher's Drive developments, but we might just talk about them very briefly. The other tree, the one at Mead House, Mead Valley Business Park, essentially because it needed doing quickly. We were told about it, but it would have already been dealt with, so that very much is for information only. So also on the Mead Valley Business Park, a proposal to reduce, as it puts it here, northeasterly limbs overhanging a building by up to 4 metres from 2 trees and to remove a dead section of another. I remember former Councillor Oakes bemoaning the fact that we often had so little information available to us about tree applications. This is a perfect example. There is the application which states what they want to do in virtually no greater detail than appears on the agenda. And there is a location plan that shows a building and marks the position of trees 1, 2 and 3. There are no photographs, for example, showing any limbs overhanging. There is no information around any part of the tree being dead. The only thing I would say is that the application is put in by James Rowlett, who I think we would probably accept as knowing he's doing about trees. Nevertheless, I would argue that there is possibly, even though you could argue it's in the nature of tree husbandry, I think there is actually so little information here that all I could say would be safe, would be to say that only if the tree officer is satisfied that the works are necessary and proportionate should permission be given. Do others think that might be a sensible response?
Yeah.
These are subject to a TPO. This is not just trees in a conservation area, which is what we're coming up to next. But these trees are subject to a TPO. And frankly, I am pretty disappointed that there isn't a proper report with photographs and things.
Yeah.
That would perhaps enable us to say, we see exactly what you're saying and why, and yes, of course it needs doing.
We don't really have the information to make a decision.
I'm just going to write tree officer. However, the next one, albeit that there is a similar paucity of information, relates to trees where there is an application simply by virtue of where they are, because we're back in North Street again, i.e. within the conservation area. We are, however, talking about an apple and a quince, and we are simply talking about reducing height and width in ways that appear to amount to no more than tree husbandry. Our normal policy would be not to object, and I don't see an obvious reason why we would. So I think that we could take a slightly different position on those, albeit that, again, there is no more than an application saying the same thing and a location plan showing us where the trees are. Content with that?
The applications have been made by the same company, haven't they?
My recollection is that it might have well been Mr. Abbott who did both applications. Is that right? Yes. So it's James Rowlett, who is well known to this council as being one of the leading tree people within our area. So if it had been from somebody that I knew nothing about at all, I would have been even more kind of dismayed at the lack of information. But frankly, I don't see any reason to get excited about that. Just indicating no objection on the basis of tree husbandry.
Do you want me to, because there's a new tree officer, this Marilyn Pickup is a new name appearing. So do you want me to write to her and to Brian Ogden and just say we're a little bit concerned at the complete lack of any
Yes.
detail?
I think we could, as a general point, say that, I mean, particularly when you look at that first application, these are trees subject to a TPO. We get no report. The application form itself suggests that there ought to be one. No pictures, no anything. How on earth are we supposed to make any sensible comment? And it might sometimes be possible to go and view the trees, but it's not always easy on the ground to identify which specific tree, if they were too close to each other, we're actually talking about. So yes, I think we should make a general point. I think NNC could be rather more robust in saying that, particularly if you've got applications for TPOs, there's really got to be some sort of a rule.
Because I think when Brian Ogden came and gave his presentation, we did state that, didn't we? We did say at the time we could do with a little bit more information, so
Point to, you know, that application is exactly the reason.
maybe this lady doesn't.
Yeah, well, let's follow it up. Can't really help it.
Okay.
So, just to touch on these two, we have managed to get through this rather quicker than I thought we might. On the Cotterstock Road development, a plan to switch the affordable housing tenure from one set of plots to another, in essence. On the face of it, so long as it doesn't involve a reduction in the amount of affordable housing, I doubt that we will get too exercised. And thinking about the layout of, say, that development, as opposed to Stoke Door Road, where one of the things we got rather exercised about was that it was a house that was put there specifically to be kind of disabled friendly, and you put it in the most inaccessible part of the entire development, which seemed bonkers. I'm not sure that I would work, but I must admit I didn't have the time to actually look at what might be available. We weren't sent anything specifically as a council, it's just something that we picked up. I have looked at these before, I've written them into my reports, but I wasn't particularly well over the weekend and ran out of time. So it might be that we would simply submit a comment that as long as it doesn't affect the amount of affordable housing bedrooms that are available negatively, we wouldn't object. The St Christopher's Drive one essentially seems to amount to trying to put up slightly different design houses to other ones, and to make some small changes to the layout to accommodate that. I suspect in the greater scheme of things that isn't going to exercise us greatly either. I must admit I was slightly surprised to see the application, because I think we'd all rather thought that Persimmon was sitting on it and had more or less land bank the development and wasn't going to do anything, but this application then promptly pops up. But it doesn't sound to me as if it's the sort of thing that's likely to exercise us. Unless anybody hasn't looked at it and has any other observations they want to make.
I assume there's no change in the number of dwellings, then what happened up at the George,
no.
they suddenly slipped all the houses.
I mean, it's not suggesting that it would allow more housing, simply that it alters the house types
Yeah,
that
that's
were
what
originally
that makes
there.
sense, but I'm aware of that.
So I can't see how they could actually sneak in some extra developments over and above the 130 dwellings. And by that I'm talking about the 65 dwellings and the 65 units in the extra care facility. That takes us through the actual applications. In terms of planning outcomes, well, they're all set out for us.
Yeah, there was a question I had about one of them. Just, it's unusual in my brief experience that where we say no objection,
Yes,
there's one that's refused. And I thought
I
that
was going to mention that for the very reason that it isn't that common that it works that way around.
Yeah.
Plenty of times we have put forward an objection only to see that permission is granted. It is less frequent, to say the least, that we find no reason to object and find that the local authority planning department does. My recollection of the reason for refusal was in essence overdevelopment.
I'm just bringing it up
Oh,
now.
there we go.
There you go. Number one, cumulative impact of the proposed.
Right.
Unduly dominating the street scene.
Which
If
is
you-
interesting.
Just
because,
quickly,
for
if you go on the
example,
portal, sorry, just if you go on the portal, Jamie, when you get home,
Yeah.
that's just a brief decision notice that I brought up, but they do a proper delegated report, which goes point by point through everything. And anything that they're not happy with, then it obviously specifies that. And that's quite a long report, but they're really interesting to read.
Okay.
they
Really
are,
interesting to read.
What is so strange about it is that there have, of course, been plenty of occasions when this council has commented upon impacts upon the street scenes. And I specifically remember the development of a new property that was put in between the property I used to live in and the neighbouring property on St Peter's Road, and the development of a property immediately opposite my old one, both of which have had huge impacts on the street scene. You only now have to drive down the hill of St Peter's Road, and those two properties stand out like the proverbial sore thumb. Indeed, we've actually got the sore thumbs with both hands because we've got one on either side of the road. We have previously objected on the grounds of impact on street scenes and overdevelopment and found that they've been granted, and then here we don't get exercised about it. They refuse it. I don't know. I just find that slightly baffling. There is one other matter that we put on the agenda, and as we haven't had problems later, I fear we might need to talk to this about whether we postpone this to next week, but I think we'll have time just to have a quick talk about it. As it says here, discuss recent works carried out on a grade 2 listed property situated within the conservation area with no prior consultation with NNC plans. And then it says discuss issues with retrospective applications and what, if anything, can be done to encourage residents to seek permission prior to undertaking works. Essentially, we got feedback into the office, which Lisa quite properly actioned straight away by getting on to the local authority, because it appeared that works were underway to a property which was indeed in the conservation area, and where no application in respect of them had come before us. And I think Lisa was trying to bring up for us the property. There it is.
It's not just in the conservation area, it's mentioned specifically in the
Yeah.
historic buildings.
I wasn't aware that it was in Pepsi, but there you go. So no, this is not insignificant property. Well, there you go.
Yes, they're working really hard on it.
Yeah. I find it difficult to believe that anybody who owns a property like that is unaware of the legislation requiring permission to do practically anything in it, including breathing. Let's just say that I was immediately alarmed when I heard about it. Lisa can give us an update about the specifics of that property in a minute. But it just does raise this wider issue around people who do work first, hope they get away with it. If they don't get away with it, then seek retrospective permission. And we have a standard formula that, disapproves of it and makes our feelings about that clear. The question, in a sense, is, could anything more be done within existing legislation to deter people from doing it, and to take effective steps to control it? And if the answer to that is that the legislation is not sufficiently robust, then legislative change is called for. I, for one, can't understand why there isn't a punitive fee for having to apply for consent retrospectively. And that could be even higher still if you're talking about a property in the conservation area, and even higher still if you were talking about a property that was listed. And why not? Those funds would immediately become available to the local authority. It would hopefully act as something of a deterrent, and it might help get the message home. We may, of course, be able to put something into our various media outlets, simply referring to the fact that we do monitor things like this, and we always report them, and to urge people, if they are uncertain as to whether they need permission, to seek guidance before they do anything, and to put in an application if the law says what is required. Lisa, is there any update on the specific property?
This is the last email that I got from Sue Scott. They'll be doing a lot of work to restore the property, and this will include removal of the roof as the nail fixings have rotted. This will not need consent as the Collie Western slates will be reused, but I've suggested to the owner that they let the town council know in case any residents contact you. The owner is sending me a schedule of works which have already been done and those they intend to do, so that with Lloyd's help, we can advise if anything does need a formal application. So the email she sent me before that, she said they're actually removing cement mortar and replacing it with what it should be, which is lime mortar. But obviously the people that contacted me, with it being a listed property in a conservation area, we thought even starting work like that, you need to approach planning.
Yes, I mean, it's clear that they've done it backwards because they haven't sought advice as to whether they might need permission. It may very well be that replacing the concrete with sort of time appropriate lime mortar is a good thing. But it's just backwards.
Still need permission for it though.
Right. I pass this building several times a day, and I have observed that in fact the actual structure, I would have to admit, is a bit like a piece of lace. I mean, the water is just falling out, and you could see right through the wall in one particular area.
I think,
So in a way, I'm not against that.
no,
Because otherwise it's going to fall down anyway.
yeah.
But there's been a lot more vans there doing a lot of other work. on
Skips,
that
we
property.
saw I have
That's the
reports of
point.
several skips, and then
Absolutely.
also when they brought power tools to get the mortar out,
Yeah.
people were saying to me, but that's possibly damaging the stone, is that the way they should do it and everything, and they were going at it hammer and tongs, if you like, so it was a bit alarming, which is why I reported it straight away.
That's right.
Whether they thought because they're actually restoring it to what it should be, they didn't need to ask anybody, but like David said, most people appreciate if you're in a listed house, you need to speak to somebody.
But the people carrying out the work must know that's what their business is.
Yes,
They
yeah.
have
I
to
thought they
know
were
that
obliged to know that sort of thing. I thought they
Yes.
could be held responsible if they don't advise the
Absolutely.
the
And I think
residents
that's
properly. Yeah.
I think it's quite serious,
Mm.
really.
Just one question, I mean, there must be, if there's emergency repair work needed on something, there must be a way of saying, okay, you can do that work now, and then
It'd be the same as the tree, the 5-day warning of the tree. If the tree is deemed to be dangerous, it's going to fall on somebody's house, then they don't have to go through the whole planning process. They've got a 5-day emergency. So I would imagine, we've not come across it before since while I've been here, I don't think.
Having exactly that situation.
But I would imagine something has to be.
Logically, there would be some
Yeah.
sort of similar provision.
It's the same with roads, if you've suddenly got to dig a road.
Yeah, if something's going to fall apart, yeah.
Anything like that.
But in a sense, this is the wider issue, and so it may be worth looking at whether either through NELC or otherwise, we lobby for legislative change, maybe contacting the MP about it, to meet with these things, which is looking at it on one level, and the obvious thing, as I said, was perhaps the fees thing. And the other one was actually just putting something out through our usual media outlets to just highlight this and actually tell members of the public, if you see something, don't assume that the powers that be, including Hemphill Town Council, know anything about it. Tell us, and if we were unaware and believe that it needs to be drawn to NHC's attention, we will do that. And so
I just have we, when we had Brian Ogden here and he gave us that talk about trees, it was very informative. Is there any way we could ask the enforcement officer to come along and give us a talk and say, realistically, this is what,
The other thing I can definitely do that. The other thing, I can't remember whether I reported this last time, but I was approached by, I can't remember his name, George Russell, I think it is, about it had been reported to him several shop frontages had changed, either just in colour or signage. So I literally went round and took pictures of everywhere that I'd noticed looked different, including the swinging signs, anything. And he investigated all of those and he came back to me and he said most of them are nothing to be concerned about. But the ones that we have got questions, obviously we're going to approach the shop owners, because I didn't realise until I started walking around taking pictures. I was like, oh, that's changed. Some of them are only minor, but some of them look quite different, and even changing a colour on a listed building, you can't just go ahead and do it. So people are reporting it either via me or straight to North Northants Council. So, but yeah, if we put something out on social media to say to people, as soon as you see something, if you're not happy, let us know.
Yeah, and the next time we've got an article in down the library,
Yeah.
Maybe a little space, we don't need much space, but just to say something would be useful.
Even drilling a hole in the stone of a listed building is not allowed.
And I recall discussions about the market hall not that long ago, where estate agents who really ought to know their business have done work which they shouldn't have done. It happens all
the time,
and you do have to be ultra vigilant, and I'm grateful to Lisa for the fact that she doesn't need to be told what to do, she just does it automatically and then lets me know after the event, which is exactly as it should be. Any other feedback or thoughts on that? In the absence of any, I think that brings us to the end of the agenda. I'm looking to make sure it does. Any other relevant matters to report, haven't we? So, Jess? So sure. So,
No.
please say anything.
Nope.
Nothing from me either. So at 9:20, I'll call the meeting to a halt. Thank you very much for attending.